Madison Clarke always seemed untouchable, the town's golden girl, a cheerleader, a beauty queen with a perfect smile, but behind the sparkling tiaras and flawless photos, a dark secret was quietly unraveling, one that would shock everyone who thought they knew her. Madison Clarke was the kind of girl people envied without realizing how carefully she curated every moment of her life. At just 17, she had already earned a reputation as the town's golden girl. Her charm and poise made her a natural in the spotlight, whether it was leading the cheer squad at Friday night football games or accepting a tiara at the annual beauty pageant. To the outside world, her life looked effortless. Teachers praised her, classmates admired her, and her social media pages painted a picture of perfection, bright smiles, designer outfits, and vacations that seemed pulled straight from a magazine. But behind the flawless image was a reality that no one could have imagined. From a young age, Madison learned that appearances mattered more than anything else. She knew how to smile when she felt anxious, laugh when she felt scared, and appear confident even when her world was falling apart inside. Her parents, while loving, were often distant, too wrapped up in their own lives to notice the pressure their daughter carried. Madison had become an expert at hiding the cracks, concealing the small signs of stress that no one dared to acknowledge. She mastered the art of perfection, and the more she succeeded in public, the more isolated she felt in private. Despite her polished exterior, Madison began to feel the weight of impossible expectations. Every cheer routine, every pageant appearance, every photo that circulated online came with an invisible cost. She was aware that a single misstep could shatter the image she had built so meticulously. There were nights she stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, questioning how long she could maintain the illusion. The fear of judgment, of gossip, of losing the admiration she had worked so hard for was constant. Even her closest friends noticed subtle changes sometimes, a flicker of worrying in her eyes or a hesitation when she laughed, but no one pressed because everyone was so captivated by the perfect girl they thought they knew. School life continued in its usual rhythm. Madison's days were filled with cheer practice, classes, and appearances at local events. Each morning, she would spend hours in front of the mirror, making sure every strand of hair was in place, every detail perfect. Her friends admired her dedication, unaware that every action was part of a careful performance designed to maintain her public persona. There was a sense of urgency in her movements, a subtle tension that only she recognized. She wasn't just a teenager navigating high school. She was performing on a stage that never turned off, where one mistake could ruin everything. Even in moments of solitude, Madison's mind was never truly at rest. She kept a journal, though she rarely let anyone see it, filled with thoughts and fears she could never voice aloud. The pages revealed a young woman under immense pressure, struggling to balance expectations with her own desires. She wrote about longing for freedom, for understanding, and for someone to see the real her behind the sparkling tiaras and perfect smiles. Yet even in her private reflections, there was a careful restraint, a fear that her vulnerability could be discovered. Madison Clarke had become a master of concealment, and the world had no idea how fragile the perfect image really was. It was during one of these quiet nights that the first signs of trouble appeared. Madison noticed changes in her body that she couldn't ignore, signs that hinted at a life-altering secret. Panic set in immediately, accompanied by a wave of fear she had never experienced. The thought of revealing anything, of disrupting the flawless narrative she had constructed, was unbearable. She found herself trapped between the life everyone admired and a reality she could no longer control. For the first time, the Golden Girl felt vulnerable, aware that the perfection she had so fiercely protected might be impossible to maintain. This tension, hidden behind layers of charm and poise, would soon set the stage for a chain of events that would shock her town and challenge everything people thought they knew about Madison Clarke. The secret that Madison had been desperately trying to hide began to weigh on her more heavily with each passing day. At first, she thought she could manage it alone, that no one would ever discover what was happening behind the carefully curated facade. She skipped classes more frequently, claiming illness or family obligations, and began avoiding her usual social circles. Her friends noticed the sudden absences, but Madison had mastered the art of excuses, answering questions with vague explanations and rehearsed smiles that left no room for further inquiry. Still, the whispers started. Rumors circulated quietly, at first subtle, almost unnoticeable, but soon they gained momentum. People began asking questions behind her back, noticing the way she avoided public events or the subtle changes in her appearance. The admiration she had once received slowly shifted into curiosity and suspicion. The pressure of keeping her secret alone became unbearable. Madison found herself wandering late at night through the empty streets of her town, seeking solitude and a place to think without anyone watching. She felt a growing sense of isolation, as though the world she had once controlled so expertly was slipping through her fingers. Every day brought new challenges: managing schoolwork, keeping up appearances, and coping with the physical changes she could no longer ignore. She began to feel panic and despair in ways she had never experienced before, recognizing that one wrong move could shatter everything. The fear of judgment was overwhelming, and she started to withdraw even further, cutting off contact with friends who might sense the truth. Then came the night that changed everything. A neighbor, walking their dog late in the evening, heard unusual noises coming from Madison's home. At first, they thought it might be a minor accident, a dropped object, or even a quarrel between family members. But the sounds continued, persistent and unsettling, until curiosity turned into concern. The neighbor called the authorities, unsure of what to expect but convinced that something serious might be happening inside the house. Around the same time, an anonymous tip arrived at the local police station, claiming that a newborn might be in danger and that Madison was involved. When the police arrived, the scene appeared calm at first glance, almost ordinary. The front yard was quiet, the lights inside the house dim, and Madison herself was nowhere in sight. But the officers sensed something was off, a tension that could not be explained by appearances alone. As they moved through the rooms, the ordinary domestic setting gave way to signs of a hidden struggle. Personal items were scattered, and subtle details hinted that someone had been living under immense stress. In a small, dimly lit room, they found the baby. Physically unharmed, the child was alone, but the surroundings suggested Madison had been struggling to care for the newborn. The discovery immediately raised questions about how long the baby had been in this state, what Madison had been experiencing, and whether someone else might have been involved. Investigators later found a series of private messages on Madison's phone and computer. She had reached out to strangers online, posting in hidden forums and private groups about her fears, confusion, and desperation. The messages revealed a young woman overwhelmed by circumstances she could not control, expressing feelings of isolation and anxiety that she had never admitted to anyone in her real life. These communications painted a picture of a life that was far from the perfect image everyone had admired. Someone, somewhere, had noticed her vulnerability, and it became increasingly clear that Madison's struggle was no longer a private matter. The secret she had worked so hard to protect was now exposed, and the investigation was only beginning to uncover the complexities hidden beneath the surface. The room where the baby was found was small, barely larger than a walk-in closet, and it smelled faintly of disinfectant mixed with the lingering scent of baby powder. The officers were struck by the contrast between the innocence of the newborn and the chaotic surroundings. Clothing and blankets were haphazardly strewn across the floor, a small crib sat pushed into the corner, and a few discarded baby bottles lay tipped over near the edge of a table. The baby's cries echoed softly in the quiet house, a fragile sound that seemed to emphasize the gravity of the situation. Despite the physical safety of the child, there was an immediate understanding among the authorities that the environment told a story of neglect and fear, one that extended far beyond what anyone had anticipated. Madison's struggle to care for the baby became evident almost immediately. She had clearly tried to create a safe space, but the evidence suggested she had been overwhelmed from the very beginning. Notes were found detailing feeding schedules, medical appointments, and lists of things she hoped to accomplish, all meticulously organized yet clearly unmanageable. Her attempts to plan for every eventuality had failed under the weight of her inexperience and anxiety. Investigators discovered that she had been trying to manage everything alone, relying on sporadic advice from anonymous online sources, never reaching out to family or friends for real assistance. The baby's basic needs had been met inconsistently, and while no severe harm had come to the child, the situation was dangerous enough to demand immediate intervention. What puzzled the authorities most was the presence of evidence that suggested someone else had been involved, lurking in the background. Small details, an unfamiliar phone number in the margins of a journal, unexplained messages on her devices, and subtle changes in the home's layout hinted that Madison might not have been acting entirely alone. Whoever it was had stayed hidden but had left faint traces of their presence, creating a web of mystery around the baby's circumstances. The idea that someone had been manipulating or influencing events from the shadows added a chilling layer to an already disturbing situation. Investigators began to consider that Madison might have been both a victim and a participant in a scenario far more complex than a simple case of neglect. The discovery of Madison's private online messages provided further insight into her mental state. She had confided in strangers, revealing deep fears and insecurities, moments of hopelessness, and the crushing weight of societal expectations. The exchanges described sleepless nights, paranoia, and an ever-growing sense of being trapped, all underscored by the fear of losing the image she had spent years building. The communications were heartbreaking in their honesty, portraying a teenager torn between the need for help and the desperate desire to preserve her reputation. Authorities quickly realized that understanding Madison's situation required more than just assessing the physical environment. The story behind the baby was entangled with manipulation, secrecy, and psychological pressure that no one outside her inner circle had fully recognized. The initial discovery had only scratched the surface of a far more complicated reality, one that involved hidden relationships, covert threats, and an intricate network of influence that had guided her actions without her conscious realization. As the investigation continued, it became clear that the case was not just about a baby left alone, it was about unraveling a web of human behavior, deception, and the dangerous consequences of secrets left to fester behind a perfect public image. The baby's condition, while not life-threatening, was a wake-up call. Social workers arrived to assess the immediate needs of the child, ensuring safety and proper care, while detectives pieced together the circumstances that had led to this moment. Each new detail added layers to the story: Madison's isolation, the hidden pressures of her social life, and the subtle but undeniable signs that someone else had been silently influencing events. Every element pointed toward a disturbing truth that the life she had portrayed so flawlessly to the world was far removed from the reality she and her baby had been living, and that the investigation was only beginning to reveal the full scope of the danger that had surrounded them both. As the investigation deepened, authorities began to examine Madison Clarke's social circle with a new intensity, realizing that the seemingly perfect life she projected was tangled in hidden rivalries and unspoken tensions. People who had once seemed harmless or supportive now appeared in a different light under scrutiny. A former pageant competitor, known for her quiet envy, emerged as a person of interest. Investigators discovered that she had maintained contact with Madison in ways that suggested more than casual friendship, leaving cryptic messages that hinted at a lingering resentment. The rivalry, once thought to be friendly competition, now appeared to have a darker undertone, suggesting that Madison's public success may have provoked hidden schemes designed to destabilize her life. Beyond the pageant world, attention turned to her friends and family. A trusted friend, someone Madison confided in occasionally, became a focal point. Analysis of communications revealed subtle attempts to influence decisions to push Madison towards secrecy and isolation. This friend had often offered guidance in a tone that seemed helpful on the surface but carried an undercurrent of control and manipulation. Authorities also noted interactions with distant relatives who had access to personal information and had occasionally visited the home under seemingly benign pretenses. Each contact was carefully examined, and patterns began to emerge, patterns that suggested someone had been observing Madison, guiding her choices, and even shaping her responses to the pressures she faced. Surveillance footage taken from neighborhood cameras provided more clues. Several brief encounters outside the home, initially dismissed as normal teenage interactions, now seemed calculated. Madison had been approached multiple times in ways that, while outwardly ordinary, hinted at an underlying orchestration. The footage revealed exchanges that were quick and discreet, suggesting the presence of someone who did not want to be noticed. Each frame added a layer of complexity to the case, showing how Madison's world was being subtly manipulated even as she tried to maintain control. The discovery of her journal added another dimension to the investigation. Its pages were filled with coded entries, emotional reflections, and hints at threats she had received but never voiced aloud. She documented moments of fear, frustration, and confusion, often in fragmented sentences that left investigators piecing together meaning. Some passages suggested she felt pressured to conceal critical information, while others hinted at the presence of someone who had exerted influence over her actions and decisions. The journal became a crucial window into her state of mind, revealing a young woman caught between loyalty, fear, and the overwhelming need to protect the life she had constructed. The more authorities uncovered, the clearer it became that Madison's situation was not the result of a single moment of poor judgment or youthful error. It was a web of influence, coercion, and psychological pressure that had gradually escalated, leaving her isolated and overwhelmed. Each discovery, the messages, the encounters, the journal entries painted a portrait of a teenager manipulated from multiple directions, struggling to navigate circumstances she had never anticipated. The investigation now focused not just on what had happened to the baby, but on understanding the complex network of relationships and hidden motives that had placed Madison in such a precarious position. It was a puzzle of human behavior, secrecy, and subtle control, one that would slowly reveal shocking truths about trust, betrayal, and the hidden dangers behind a life that appeared perfect to the outside world. Every revelation brought new questions: who had the most to gain from Madison's secrecy? How much of her life had been influenced without her awareness? And, most unsettling, how far had the manipulation gone before it reached a point where the baby's safety was compromised? The investigation had moved beyond the immediate crisis to uncover the layers of deception and pressure surrounding Madison, hinting at a level of orchestration that no one had expected and suggesting that the story of the Golden Girl was far more disturbing than anyone had ever imagined. The final pieces of the puzzle fell into place in a way that stunned investigators and shook the small town to its core. After weeks of following leads, cross-referencing messages, and analyzing surveillance footage, authorities identified the person who had orchestrated much of the manipulation surrounding Madison Clarke. It was not a stranger, as many had speculated, but someone who had been woven into her life for years. The betrayal cut deeper than anyone could have anticipated because it came from a person Madison had trusted implicitly, someone whose influence had guided her choices and concealed critical truths until it was almost too late. The motive, when finally revealed, was both twisted and chilling. It was not born from financial gain or an overt act of revenge, but from a desire for control and attention. This individual thrived on the power of secrecy and the illusion of guidance, relishing the ability to shape events while remaining hidden. The manipulation was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, nudging Madison toward decisions that kept her isolated and dependent on the orchestrator's advice. Over time, the influence escalated, creating circumstances in which Madison could no longer act freely without the presence of unseen pressures. The baby's precarious situation was a tragic consequence of this control, a physical manifestation of the psychological web that had ensnared Madison. For Madison, the revelation was both liberating and devastating. The truth explained the confusion, fear, and isolation she had felt, but it also underscored the depth of the betrayal she had endured. She had believed that she was navigating a challenging situation alone, unaware that someone she trusted had been quietly shaping events around her. The realization brought a mix of relief, sorrow, and anger. It was a confirmation that her instincts and fears had been valid, that the unease she had felt in the shadows of her perfect life was grounded in reality. The investigation also revealed how carefully the orchestrator had manipulated others in Madison's circle. Friends, acquaintances, and even distant relatives had been subtly influenced or misled, creating a network that protected the orchestrator while isolating Madison. Each interaction was calculated, each suggestion carefully placed to maintain the illusion that Madison was acting independently. Authorities pieced together messages, online communications, and physical evidence that demonstrated a deliberate pattern of psychological control, one that escalated until it resulted in the baby being left in a dangerous situation. After the truth came to light, Madison and her family faced the difficult task of rebuilding their lives. The baby was placed in a safe and nurturing environment, surrounded by family who were now fully aware of the dangers that had existed. Madison began the slow process of healing, grappling with the emotional aftermath of manipulation, isolation, and betrayal. Her experience became a cautionary tale in the town, a reminder that appearances can be deceiving and that even those who seem to have perfect lives may be facing hidden dangers. The story of Madison Clarke left a lasting impression, illustrating how trust can be weaponized, how secrecy can escalate into danger, and how vulnerability can be exploited in ways that no one sees coming. The small town that had once admired her flawless image now had to confront a darker reality, that the most shocking betrayals often come from those closest to us, and that the consequences of manipulation can ripple far beyond what anyone could predict. The case served as a haunting reminder that perfection can be an illusion, and that behind even the brightest smiles, hidden struggles and unseen threats may be waiting, ready to reshape lives forever.